Hey Fitz Nation, as UFC 284 went down in Perth, Australia, I was lucky enough to get assigned to studio shows up at ESPN headquarters in Bristol, Connecticut. The last time I was at ESPN headquarters was way back in 2014 when I auditioned for a job. It was great to be back. I worked with Laura Senko and Anthony Smith, and I found some time to sit down with Anthony Smith at the hotel. Enjoy. Should we talk about your fight first? It was announced.
Yeah.
It's out there, right?
Yeah, it's out there.
It's out there in the world.
It is.
Johnny Walker in May.
Yeah, you know, that Johnny Walker's been a fight that it's kind of always been right there for a long time. It's been talked about. The matchmakers have talked about it several times, and for whatever reason, it just hasn't matched up. And I guess here we are. He's doing well. He's looking good. Had some date issues as far as scheduling it, but I think we're ready to go now.
What was it like for you? Because you had Jamal Hill, you had Johnny, and then you had Jamal Hill, and everything's been pushed back for you.
Yeah.
What's that been like?
It's frustrating. I always like to stay active. I do better just emotionally when I'm active and I'm constantly chasing something. I have a target, and for the last 3 years I've been fighting once a year for 3 years, and so. That part's been frustrating for me, for sure. What
happens when you have the lower work rate? Like, why mentally? Like, what get inside your head? Like, what?
Yeah, I'm just spinning my wheels. I always have to be chasing something. My grandpa's always explained, all the way back to when I was a little kid, you're either a chaser or you're a front runner. And I'm not a good front runner. Guys that run from the front the entire time, I don't do well being self-motivated all the time. I find myself distracted, and I don't know. It's just hard to always stay on track. So I'm a much better chaser, for sure.
You mean like a front runner? Like they'll sit on a win, and it kind of keeps them going.
Right. I'm not like that at all.
You'll put a win away, like right away.
Yeah, I'll check it right away. So I always just need the next thing. I don't do. That's why in between fights I stack up desk jobs. Because I have the next thing to look forward to, the next thing to work on, the next thing to study for, the next workout to get in. If I don't have something to look forward to, I just don't do well. It just messes with me.
When did you realize that?
I've always been like that. Always.
But like when in your head, are you like, that's what I am? That's what I'm dealing with? Because if you don't, then sometimes it can feel like this crazy, horrible existence, right? Yeah. Where you can never be satisfied.
Yeah, I probably realized that was the problem. I think probably 2013, when I blew my knee, and it was the first time I was out for a really long time, and I just couldn't understand like why I was so depressed and why I was so down and sad, and I couldn't figure out why I was just so unhappy. And I think at the time it was just my girlfriend, but it's my wife now. Said, "Do you think it's because you don't have anything to look forward to? Like you're not pushing towards something?" And I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It is wild. But it's great when you can figure that out about yourself.
Yeah, it's also terrifying because I don't know what I'm going to do when I don't have this. I think that probably a lot of guys have similar issues. That's why it's, guys hang around too long, guys stick in the game too long, because it's not always a money thing. And if I never fought again, financially, it wouldn't change anything for me.
Right.
My lifestyle wouldn't change. I still do the podcast, still got the desk work. Like, I live a super humble life. But I don't know what I would do with my time and with all the energy and focus that I need to have.
The media stuff wouldn't be enough.
I don't think so.
Is there a world where you see yourself like, well, I can still train and train and train, but I just won't actually get in there, since that's more of your existence as a fighter anyways? It's like 98% training and 2% actual performance.
Yeah, I mean, eventually it'll just be, I think that's how a lot of guys kind of fade into retirement. I think of guys like, I suppose it's a little hot button these days, but guys like James Krause kind of did a similar thing. Like, he didn't really, until the end, he didn't really make this huge announcement that he was retired. Right. I think everyone around him knew that, but he just continued to train and just stopped taking fights. I think Zach Cummings, another Kansas City guy, is very similar to that. So I do think that happens. I think that my focus will just switch to something else, though. Yeah. Whether it be, competitive jiu-jitsu, I think will probably be a focus. I hunt a lot in between fights. I think that's some of it. It's just it's a competition to me.
How old are you? 36?
34.
34. Sorry about that. Do you start thinking about that? 34, you're like, is it on the horizon to where you're like, I'm starting to think about it? Or, I mean, Glover is 42.
No, I don't want to fight into my 40s for sure. Unless I'm still competitive at a high level. I don't want to be doing this if up and comers and super young guys are beating me up and if the title's not even an option anymore, I don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to be the best. I want to chase the world title. And the second that's not a possibility, or I've already done it, then we'll start looking somewhere else.
That was kind of Felder's thing. Like, he lost to Hooker, debatable. And then he lost to RDA, and it was like, he's like, I have to win. I look at the roadmap, and it's just like, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, maybe it's not worth it.
Yeah.
I think that Felder and I, we've compared this before, too. It's sometimes it's your kids, too.
Mm-hmm.
My oldest is 11 years old, and all four of them, they only know me as a competitive fighter.
Right.
At some point in time, I have a whole lifetime ahead of me still of doing something else. God willing, I have another 34 years after this. So it's like, how much do you want to continue to sacrifice?
Mm-hmm.
How much, if I'm going to make the sacrifice, it has to be worth it. It has to be because I'm getting close to a title or I'm still in the hunt for a title. If we're just fighting to fighting, I do training camps in Denver. I'm on the road all the time. It's the injuries and the surgeries and you miss a lot. I'm not going to make that sacrifice just to go fight on some undercard of some cool pay-per-view. It's not worth it, I have a baby that's never going to know me as a cool fighter. Probably.
I've never thought of this until just now, because you said you compare it with Felder and you've had this conversation. Felder, 2 girls. You, 4 girls.
Yeah.
Do you think it has a girl dad aspect to it? Do you think if you had boys, you'd be like, I want to chase it and chase it and chase it and never give up type of thing, right?
Potentially, because
it could be something.
I think that boys understand that differently. I think that boys and girls are so different. So
I think as fathers, I only have 2 boys, but I think as fathers, the messaging I hear from some people is like, they want to send a different message to their son than they do their daughter.
For sure,
right?
For sure. And I just go back to, I have a 16-month-old that likely, it could change, but most likely, she will never know me as a famous high-level competitive martial artist. Mm-hmm. I'm just dad to her, and I need to at some point accept that to whatever generation she's in, I'm just gonna have to be something else, and I gotta, at some point in time, I need to make that transition and not be forced to. Chael always says that no one's ever done with this game. The game is just done with you. I'd rather combat that as much as possible.
Go out on your terms.
Right.
It's tough to do.
Yeah, it's because you always feel like you're leaving something on the table. I don't want to, Uncle Chael's got the best quotes, but everyone leaves this game face down and embarrassed. And then I'd rather not do that too many times.
Yeah. It is tricky, and I always tell people, they're like, why do people in MMA retire and then they always come back? Like, why is MMA known for that?
Yeah.
And I go, well, like, even Felder right now, it's like, what if you could kind of work hard in the gym and put it together and you're a veteran and make like a 6-figure chunk of change for kind of putting your body through hell, but then it'll be over.
Yeah.
And you've done it a lot. And it's just like, when do you say no to that ultimately? It's tough.
It's really hard. You're always going to leave something
Especially
on the table.
in the case of you, like, you're a main event guy, you're a pay-per-view main card type of guy, title challenger type of guy. It's just like, I could go make $200K, but I'm done.
Bare minimum, I'm going to break off $500,000 every time.
Right.
So it's like, when do you decide that enough is enough? That's really tough.
Yeah.
It's in like Felder, there's a lot of guys, most guys he would still beat.
Yeah.
And he knows that.
Yeah.
Like, and to continue to say no, it's just at the highest level. Is Paul going to struggle? Maybe, but I think some of that is where his focus is. That's not, he's not focused on being a top guy in the world. But I don't have any doubts that most of the guys, even in those rankings at 155 and as skinny as he is these days, maybe 145, Paul Felder would do just fine with and beat a lot of those guys. So that's why guys come back, because he sits on the outside and sees it. He breaks them down. He knows where he's at physically. It's hard to turn down.
Not to mention, he not to dive too deep in on the Paul Felder rabbit hole, but he now he like he said on Rogan, he's just like, I have regrets, and he's told me too, like, now I'm treating my body a certain way. I didn't do this. Like, how good could I have been? And you like learn all as you get older, and you learn all these things, but then you back off in terms of your drive or physical capability, maybe. But back to you, the light heavyweight title, like, you're very much in the thick of that race. How do you view the draw in December and then Jamal beating Glover for you?
You know, the draw was weird. That's just and then the quick pulling Jamal out of my fight with me, and then, you know, going right to the Glover fight, how quickly that happened. That whole thing seemed very snap reaction, which is not super indicative of the UFC all the time. So that was kind of odd. And the Jamal and Glover fight went a lot like I thought it would, especially going and training with Jamal and helping him out leading into that. I think that it just kind of the perfect storm, the way that Glover grapples, the way that Jamal defends. I think a lot of skill gaps can be closed in this game with just some delusional belief in yourself. And I know that sounds crazy, but I think that Conor did it for a long time. Like, if Conor and Jose Aldo fought 10 times, I don't think Conor beats him like that 10 times, you know? It's sometimes just a delusional belief in yourself that just ultimate, I can do it and I'm gonna do it, changes a lot. So I think that Jamal is a perfect example of that, where no one thought he could do it, but I go and train with him, and and there's certain situations where he has no reason to believe that he should be able to win in some of those positions, but he does. And just that belief alone is sometimes enough to get it done. I think it was the perfect storm. I couldn't be more happier for those guys, because I was in those locker rooms with them. I was in the gym with him in his hometown. And it's just very small, homegrown love. Those guys just love each other, and it was super cool to see it. And then to be there in Brazil and see him potentially have the performance of a lifetime was cool. So, but it does very much leave the division open for a lot of people. Rakic is hurt, but he's also coming off a loss, albeit kind of a weird one. It's a loss. I'm coming off a loss, again, kind of a weird one, because it was, kind of started with an injury. Blachowicz coming off a win over Rakic, again, kind of a weird one. And then a draw, Magomedov or Ankalaev, kind of coming off of a draw, kind of a weird one. So it's weird up there.
Yeah.
The top of the division is real funky. Yuri's hurt. I think the second that guy comes back, he deserves a title shot. I don't think anyone in the division would probably argue with that.
Yeah.
Which I think is a credit to him and how much respect he has in the division. The way he carries himself. It's not even just his skill set. I think everyone in the division feels like they can beat Yuri, especially in the top 6, 7 of us. But the way he's carried himself, he doesn't talk trash. He's super respectful. He's humble. He just approaches the game the right way. I think everyone kind of would step back and put their hands up and say that's him.
The delusional self-belief, I don't think you're crazy. I think the problem is there's not enough people that believe that.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
Yeah, there's a couple people that like Sean O'Malley stands out to me.
Yeah.
Like Conor obviously has made an entire career out of it, and that's not saying that they don't have the skills. It's just, if you look at what Jamal's done, and you look at what Conor did up to some of those points, and you look at what Sean O'Malley and the people that he's beaten, they have no reason to believe what they believe. Like there's no data behind it that supports that, but they just believe it, and that's dangerous. That's super dangerous.
Yeah. It's like beyond fighting, beyond athletics, it's like a society thing. It's just like we always tend to want to pull down on ourselves and be realistic. And that often is like what totally holds you back. It's like,
Right.
I'm just being realistic. And it's just like, well, then that's going to be your reality.
Right? Like those people are able to remove whatever ceiling most people in
Other
society would
people
put
have.
on them. And, it's like Sean O'Malley had no reason to believe. There's no data that supported it. There's no research you could have done. There was nothing to say that he should have went in there where he was at in his career and then get a win over a guy like Peter Yan.
Right.
There's nothing that says he should be able to do that.
Yeah.
But he had no doubt. And you could see it in his eyes when he talked. Like some guys, you can tell it's just kind of BS. They're just hyping it up. And you can tell they're trying to hype themselves up. Like Sean had no doubt. And I kind of seen something similar in Volkanovski's eyes and the way that he's talked yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
When I was watching that face-off. Like that was, I just seen that like, oh, he has no doubt.
Right.
Like there's no question to him.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is. For you, as we've talked a lot about other fighters, you've become, we were talking about this last night off camera, you've become somewhat of a headline generator.
Yeah, unintentionally.
Like, how do you, like, when did that click for you? Because you've had this long career, you're a veteran, and then all of a sudden, it's like boom, boom, boom. And you're not trying to be this clickbait guy.
No, I don't know when I started becoming the clickbait guy. It's, the podcast with Bisping has started that a little bit because we do talk in such long form that there is so much to it, and we kind of go all, Bisping and I have said some crazy things about unrelated stuff to MMA.
Yeah.
So sometimes like, man, I hope nobody listens to that. Like that's a bad one.
Yeah.
But it's always MMA related, and I think that it's kind of started after the fight with John Jones, and I started working the desk more, and I started speaking in somewhat absolutes.
That'll do it.
When I really believed in something.
Yeah.
And then for the longest time, it was like I was right constantly. Like I would really bold statements, super absolute terms, and then it was right most of the time. And then people started paying attention. And
wow, you just fought for a title. Mm-hmm. You had never achieved that level of credibility as a fighter.
Right.
So your word carried a lot.
So then it was then what I would say was, had some credibility to it. And now I think that sometimes the media is used to me speaking in such absolute terms, and then I get caught up sometimes just BSing with Bisping or just chit-chatting back and forth, and then it's being sometimes held to the same standards if I'm saying this is absolutely going to happen, here's how it is, I'm not always speaking like that.
Yeah. Do you like it?
I mean, I don't really care.
Ultimately, it's good for your career.
It is. It's very good for my career. The only people that ever really have anything to say about it is, your quote unquote Twitter trolls.
Yes.
It doesn't really bug me too much. My profile's grown significantly. Guys in the media, as far as, I guess on the broadcasting side, maybe less media, but broadcasting, guys have made absolute careers over being kind of the hot take person. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just speaking my opinion, but it is written in the media as hot takes.
Right.
Like a guy like Stephen A. I would never compare myself to him, but Stephen A. doesn't always believe the stuff that he says, but he's very absolute about it.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. People pay attention. I do sometimes get sick of constantly scrolling through Twitter, like Anthony Smith says. Like, I don't say that much.
Right.
I don't say that much, but it's definitely written about a lot.
Some people like to avoid that, especially like fighters. They have the respect of like, they don't want to talk about others, or they don't want to put an opinion out there because they're afraid that it'll come back and bite them in that personal relationship or in a professional relationship setting. Mm-hmm. You don't seem to have that.
No, I don't really hang out with fighters. I never have.
And that's probably why you don't have that.
I don't have it. Yeah, and it's not that I avoid hanging out with fighters. I just never really have. Even, I do my training camps at Factory X. Like, I love those guys, but I don't hang out. Like, I'm very different in the sport.
You don't have to face them daily.
No,
after a media thing.
Yeah, no, I don't ever have to, because I live a different life than, I would say, 70% of the fighters in the UFC. I'm a dad. I have 4 kids. I'm married. I live in in the Midwest in Nebraska, which isn't like this huge hub for mixed martial arts. I travel to Denver, but I only hang out with my team. I don't go to local MMA events. You know what I mean? I don't hang out with celebrities. I don't hang out with athletes. I have a few friends on the team in Denver that are similar in age, similar in kind of lifestyle. Like Cody Brundage has a couple kids, he's married. Dustin Jacoby's married, he's my age. Like, you know, Rob, the PFL 205 champion, he's my age. He's got a long-time girlfriend. So, like, stuff like that. Like, guys that are similar to me, I'll hang out with. But, you know, most MMA fighters are wild animals, and they're young guys, and they party hard. You know what I mean? That's just not me.
So, being that you are a headline generator, I don't want to guarantee generating all these headlines, but I wouldn't hate it for the show's sake. But 30 years, right? UFC celebrating 30 years this year. A couple of quick hitters, if you will. What do you think should be celebrated about MMA and the UFC that maybe we don't celebrate enough? We take it for granted a little bit.
Well, that's a hard question. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a easy answer for it.
Yeah, there's really not. I don't, you know, obviously we've talked a little bit about the slap fighting thing. I think that the UFC was, in the sport in general, was very much looked at similar to how a lot of people are looking at.
Agree with that.
Dana White's slap fighting league. Now, I don't necessarily know if the slap fighting is going to take off and be in someday being in a position that the UFC is in. I don't know if I see that happening, but I think that it was very much looked at like that at a point in time where people were disgusted and kind of threw their hands up with it. I think just the fact that it's very easy to say, oh, we made it here and here's where we are. I think the fact that the UFC was able to get accepted kind of broad spectrum is a little bit of an anomaly. That it's even made it, that it was even accepted that we're on ESPN. It's crazy that for me to like...
I guess that's maybe the easiest answer is like, hey, can we step back and realize 30 years ago what it was and the fact that we're about to go to ESPN headquarters?
Right, it's wild.
And like be talking about MMA and UFC 284.
You know, I was getting my makeup done yesterday, and the makeup lady, where we getting touched up right before we went on at the end, and she said, "Oh my God, I love your hand tattoos." And I thought to myself, I wonder how long that's been happening. How long has there been on-air talent at ESPN headquarters that we're in a position for someone to say, "Oh my God, I love your hand tattoos." But that's like a very UFC specific thing. Like,
absolutely.
I fell in love with this sport almost immediately because I was accepted just for who I was. I didn't have to be anybody else. I didn't have to, you know, I was kind of floating around in life, not figuring it, not really knowing what I was doing. And MMA just accepted me for who I am. And most of the time celebrated it, you know, for being just a crazy person. But the UFC, that's very UFC specific. You got hand tattoos, you're Cheeto, you got tattoos on your neck and on your head. Like, if you know what you're talking about, we'll give you an opportunity. You know what I mean? I think that alone is just is giving opportunities to people like me that shouldn't necessarily maybe be in these positions an opportunity.
I would just say too, tattoos in general, like there's a lot more NFL players with tattoos
for sure,
and sleeves and whatever, but obviously it's on the next level with MMA fighters. If you fast forward 30 years, have you thought of like a big change that you think maybe will happen slowly, but in 30 years it'll be like kind of a major change to the sport?
Well, I think it'll be, you know, it's one of the biggest sports in the world, but, you know, like basketball and soccer and football, like little kids are doing that from when they're little. You know? I think MMA will eventually be there. You know, Laura talked yesterday about kids in Russia are, you know, we put our kids in soccer when they're 4 and 5 years old. In Russia, they're doing Sambo. So I think that MMA will be like that in 30 years, where it will be, we're going to put our little kids in jiu-jitsu, and so I think that that's going to help continue to grow the sport. But I don't suspect that we're going to get a whole lot of like differences in the game. I think that the rules are, you know, like basketball rule, you know, basketball tweaks the rules a little bit here. Football changes some of the rules a little bit, but by and large, it's, for the most part, the game is the same. I think MMA will be the same. Well,
there's not as many moving parts because it's 1v1.
Right.
Like football, like how many possibilities are there? With 22 guys on a field and 7 refs and whatever. But the other thing is too, it's like, you know, weight cutting is, you know, its own issue. And I just go,
Yeah.
I just don't know as a promotion how you promote an event and then do like, you can't cut weight or like I don't know how you do that.
Well, there's definitely going to have to be some change.
Without like, you have to weigh in on the day of the fight, but then you're flirting with a whole new
That's
thing.
a whole problem too.
It's like a real problem that the event could get canceled type of thing.
Right. Well,
and then I'm like, then you can't even have a thing.
And then people are going to get hurt really badly.
Because they'll push it.
They'll push it.
They push a day of.
And you can implement as many rules as you want. MMA fighters are just different breeds of people. And they're going to push it. Even if they say they're not. Even if you tell yourself, I'm not going to push it. As time goes on, you're going to slowly keep pushing that envelope until something bad happens. That's just how it is. So I don't know what the answer there. I suspect there's going to be a bunch of, you know, I think we're going to end up with our own scoring system, and over time that'll get figured out. But the weight cutting thing is going to be forever a thing.
Yeah, it's true. There's no way for it to not to be. In any weight sport,
right,
I guess the only way would be boxing has like weight classes every 4 pounds. So it's just like, okay, you don't have to try to weigh 155 or 170 when you weigh whatever it is, you know. If there's a 155, 159, 165, 169 and whatever, you know, it's a different thing. For you, so I've been with the UFC 5 years, and it was right around, it was like, I don't know, for me, when I look at your career, you were like this veteran, but 2018 was just like, I feel like your career did this and then this, and it's like,
yeah,
it's like, how do you look back on your career and like make sense of how far you went in such a short amount of time?
I was always kind of floundering around, but I've never lost a fight where I felt like I could never beat that guy. I was just missing a piece of the puzzle always, like just always something that I was struggling with, but I never felt like I just got beat by the better guy. Maybe that's that delusional belief in myself. Maybe I was just getting beat by people that were better than me. I just wouldn't believe it. So I just kept kind of plugging away. I took a lot of losses early, but once we stopped cutting to 85, made the biggest difference initially. I was spending training camps getting better and not getting skinnier. I was not so stressed out. Everyone else around me wasn't so stressed out. The weight cuts were absolutely miserable. So once I was able to do that, that made a big difference. I've said for a lot of years that the hardest place to hang out is when you're ranked like probably 13th or 14th to like 20th. It's the hardest place to hang out in any division because everyone right there is so good, and so you're just knocking off your own people, like your own prospects, you know, like you're killing your own. So like all these guys are down here just battling it out. It's like, here's where the real war is. So when I moved up, I fought Rashad, and then I was on my way to start battling out with your guys like Dustin Jacoby. He's good enough to beat anybody, but he's down there. He's got fights with Khalil, and he's got this other Russian new guy, and he's, you know, like that's where the bulk and the hardest of like area to live in a division is right there, because everyone's right about the same level and they're just knocking each other's heads off. But then I got the Shogun fight, so I got to jump all of that, and I didn't have to do all that bullshit that was down below. So then I jumped right into the rankings at number 8. I went from unranked to number 8, and then the next fight after that was Rashad, Shogun, Volkan. So then Volkan was number 2. So then I went from 8 to, you know what I mean? I was able to kind of...
You went Rashad to Shogun to Volkan to John Jones.
Yeah. So I was able to skip a lot of the heavy lifting. I don't want to say that it was not any easier. The fights were still really hard, but I didn't have to do as much of it. And so that helped a lot, where I just took really tough fights, you know. And then after John Jones, it was Alexander Gustafsson, and then from Gustafsson to Glover, from Glover to Rakic to, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And then you're in like main events pretty much exclusively. Main events or huge pay-per-view
crazy
events.
Hard fights. Yeah, and all really hard fights. But I didn't, because of my age and the miles, I think I was super fortunate to not have to swim around in that lower shark tank. And I believe wholeheartedly that I would have done just fine and still rose the ranks pretty quickly. But I did get Shogun gave me a huge opportunity, and I'll always be thankful for that.
I get what you're saying though, because it's almost like if you, like in the PGA Tour, it's like, okay, if you're like a top golfer that's like won some majors and whatever, okay, like you're kind of made, right? You don't have to worry about your status or whatever. If you're that guy that's like flirting with like, I need to stay on the tour for next year, that's like a fierce battle where there's only a certain amount of spots. And not to mention in fighting, if you're 12, you don't want to fight 16. You want to fight 9.
Right.
And if you're 16, you'll cut off your left leg to fight 14.
But like you're getting matched up with like debut guys, so like you're
right.
It's a
real battle. I've never thought of that. 13 to 20-ish.
Yeah, that's a battle down there, and those guys
depending
are
on the
so
division
hungry.
too.
And they'll continue to fight so often because they're not making any money.
Right.
So like, they're willing to do anything. They'll fight on short notice. They'll fight hurt. Like that type of hunger is different. Like I'm not unaware that us in the top 5 live a different life than the guys that are unranked down in the in the 20s. Like I'm not unaware of that. So we have to find a different reason to be motivated. You got to find that hunger. I think it's some of the problems Connor's had and a lot of the guys at the top. But it's those guys are just built different. That's why I was so nervous going into the Devin Clark fight, because he just wanted it so bad. And I was like ranked 6 and he's unranked. Like, it's a terrible place to be.
Yeah.
It's a terrible place to be.
Yeah. What's the value in taking the long road? Because you kind of did take the long road.
I don't know what the value is.
But there's a lot of value.
There, for sure. For sure. I think that, I don't know, just the appreciation for sure. I think just the view from 30,000 feet just on everything, I think is valuable. I think that sometimes you see these, I always call them younger guys. It's not like I'm some super old guy, but greener guys in the game. I always tell them, like, you can't get too up and you can't get too down. But when your road's only been this long, like one big loss or, in your head it's a big loss, could be like the end of the world. I've got 16 of them and I'm still in the top 5 in the world. You know what I mean? Like, one loss is not that big of a deal. But I have the luxury of a long road to know that that's the case. Yeah. Because I've lived it several times. So I think just some perspective on the game, it's like you can't get too up because you're probably not going to be there that long. Yeah. that's just how the game is. So I think the long road has given me a lot of perspective when it comes to the broadcasting side, though. Yeah. I don't know, to really see things for what it actually is. And we get so excited sometimes, and sometimes I have to remember to pump the brakes a little bit. I hope your road is just as long as you want it to be. Exactly. Thanks, exactly. Buddy. I appreciate you. Great chat, man. Hell yeah.